right now, families, teachers, students, grandparents, churches, small businesses, schools, and just about every person at every age is feeling all of the feels right now. We are mad, sad, scared, annoyed, frustrated, anxious, worried, and I'm betting a lot of you are pointing those feelings to God. At least I hope that you are. Let me explain what I mean. I've had people in my life tell me, you can't question God. As helpful as these people are trying to be, they're wrong. The Bible preaches the opposite. You can question God all you want. You can wail and moan and yell and cuss and raise your fist at the sky demanding answers from God. I mean, God can take it. I would say that God even prefers it. It's better than keeping it buried within. As a matter of fact, God intentionally plants a roadmap in Scripture for how we can best deal with our pain. This week and next, I want to touch on what all of this looks like. It's called lament. I think it's a built-in prayer practice that allows us to show how we can best share our hurts and heartaches with God in a way that moves us towards healing. To demonstrate this, we'll look at two somewhat obscure biblical sources, Habakkuk and the book of Lamentations. Today, let's talk Habakkuk. We know very little about him, other than he's a minor prophet that's fearful of the Chaldeans, which is another name for the Babylonians. Habakkuk 1 in verses 6 and 7 says this, "For I am rousing the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous nation, who march though the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. Dread and fearsome are they." This dates Habakkuk somewhere in the late 6th century, around the time Babylon sacks Judah and sends the Judeans into exile. To whom Habakkuk is speaking, though, matters tremendously because his audience is God. Most prophetic writings are to a group of people trying to convince the people that God is mad and that the people need to turn from their evil ways. But Habakkuk is the opposite. It's about the anger of the individual, the despair of the prophet who's lamenting and crying and yelling and fiercely attacking God. And buried in this book is a roadmap we can use to follow towards healing. So let's start in chapter 1. Just like us today, Habakkuk feels the weight of his brokenness. So he opens the book by screaming to God, "O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not listen? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? So the law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous, therefore judgment comes forth perverted." This is gut-wrenching. "O Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not listen?" Wow. Here's the deal. To be human, and Habakkuk knows this, is to suffer. It's part of the deal. And when we feel the weight of suffering, we too have said similar things to God. At least we've wanted to. Everyone is fighting something most of us can't see. Addiction, loss, frustration, breakups, brokenness, anxieties that leave us emotionally and mentally fatigued. This is what's happening with families in the wake of our school announcements going virtual, and what's happening in our minds and souls of those who are affected by COVID-19. It's also the case for Habakkuk. So he opened up his heart and he told God what he thought about it. And what unfolds is what we know as the cycle of lament. So here's what Habakkuk does and what we can do too. First, he cries out to God. He addresses God with his hurt. Second, he complains. He lets God hear his anger, his pain, his heartache, and his sadness. And when he does this, it becomes wildly cathartic. And in a mystical way, when he does this, when we do this, just like with Habakkuk, God hears it and engages us in it. Which brings up an important point. Habakkuk is not heard by God because he takes his pain to God to hear, but because it's his pain that opens his awareness to God. Let me say that again. Habakkuk is not heard because it takes pain for God to hear him, but because it's his pain that opens his awareness to hear God. God always hears our prayers, but it's in our suffering that we finally open up ourselves to hearing God. At least I hope you'll turn to God in your suffering. Some of us blame God for our misfortunes, but the God of love never rains down suffering on you. Instead, the God of love meets you in the suffering and comforts you through it. Habakkuk 1 is a dialogue with God. It's a back and forth between the two of them that's worth reading and imitating. Because when you get into chapter 2, look what Habakkuk says. Verse 1. I will stand at my watchpost. I will station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me and what he will answer concerning my complaint. Now think about this. The man who was broken to the core in chapter 1, who was mad at God, is now the one ready to wait upon the Lord. I will stand at my watchpost. I mean, this is no small change. Verse 2. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on the tablets so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. This is the third step of lament. Affirmation of trust. It's saying, Lord, I believe, so I'll wait. Lord, I believe. My faith knows you will be with me. This third step is the hardest, but it's also the most crucial. We must be willing to wait upon the Lord. Habakkuk does this, and because of it, we get an incredible verse in Habakkuk 2:4, which becomes the cornerstone of New Testament theology that we know of justification by faith. It says this, look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith. This is true for us even today. Our faith tells us God meets us in our suffering. I mean, that's pretty much the entire story of Jesus in the New Testament. I mean, he steps into our suffering world and suffers our suffering unto himself. And this is what lament reminds us. When we lament, our hearts open to God's presence. Our soul feels the depth of faith, and we are comforted that we worship a God who meets us in our suffering. And when we do this, we move to the fourth step of lament, assurance. Look at what Habakkuk does in chapter 3, and starting in verse 2. O Lord, I have heard of your renown, and I stand in awe. O Lord, of your work. In our own time, revive it. In our own time, make it known. In wrath, may you remember mercy. Wow. Habakkuk should be fed up with waiting on God, but he's not. Lament gives him the tools to move past his anger and to arrive at a firmer foundation. So by the start of the third chapter, where he's fully on board with God's plan, and he has the endurance to wait. Habakkuk shows us a wonderful process for grief and lament, and this still applies today. It looks like this. We address God, we complain to God, say what you got to say, and we arrive at an affirmation of trust that God hears us and is going to respond. And then we are assured that God is with us in our pain. Lament moves us past our anger. It works through our suffering and finds hidden within us faith. And we realize God's with us in our suffering. God's not causing it, but joining us in it and giving us the ability to persevere. This is powerful. And it's something we have to remember as we go forward into these unknown spaces of school and work and more of COVID-19. God is able to bear the pain that we feel. Naming our grief leads us to a deeper knowledge that somehow, somewhere, God is in control of this. Somehow, somewhere, God is binding the broken. Somehow, somewhere, God is redeeming all of this. Habakkuk is a powerful testimony that no matter what we're feeling, we can lift our heads out of the darkness and declare, "O Lord, I have heard of your renown, and I stand in awe. O Lord, of your work in your own time, revive it." So what I think all of this is saying is that if you need to cuss or yell or scream or bemoan or lament all that's unfolding in your life, do it. And then let the Spirit guide you through it, because it will lead you to new life.